Are the Los Angeles Chargers in trouble with the injury news to Justin Herbert? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostraker. I am one of the many NFL experts here on our network here, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and the host of Locked On Ravens. But we are here with you, free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and in audio form wherever you get your shows. And thank you so much for making Locked On NFL a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We have a bunch to talk about today. Is there trouble in Los Angeles with Justin Herbert's injury news? Talk about DeAndre Hopkins updates. And, of course, DJ Moore getting extended. So that means in the first segment, Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers will be joining us. In the second segment, Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans will join us. And then finally, Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears will help us round it out. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Dan Wade of Locked On Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers got some pretty unfortunate news on Justin Herbert last week, and here to talk about that and potential long-term implications for the season is Dan Wade, the host of Locked On Chargers. And Dan, I know that this is not great timing for the Chargers in terms of getting Herbert some reps with his new wide receiver group, although it's better now in the training camp / preseason part than, of course, when it happens during the year. But so can you dive into what exactly Herbert is dealing with here, the timeline for his return, and what this could mean for the Chargers as a whole moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question because there are some details on it, but it's very few and far between. And so you're left piecing together a little bit, especially when you get the announcement from the team, which kind of something that doesn't happen very often. They gave you a little bit of a timeline with kind of a public service announcement saying that he injured his plantar fascia, that he's going to be in a walking boot for about 2 weeks, and then he'll ramp up gradually from there. And I think the big distinction here is it's a plantar fascia injury, not plantar fasciitis, right? Which is something that is a lot of NFL players have dealt with. And it's a more degenerative kind of lingering issue, something that you might have to just kind of tolerate and manage as opposed to just letting it heal and not having to worry about it. So I guess that's good news. The hard thing is we don't really know the extent of the injury. The fact that they're saying they believe he'll be ready for the regular season is great news. If it comes down to a pain management thing, Justin Herbert has already shown that he is able to go out there and it won't affect him too much. I think the hard thing here, Kevin, is it puts you in a really big predicament at the beginning of the season because they're saying, hey, he should be ready, but we never know how that story is going to end, right? We don't know if that's the end of the story or not. And you have 2 weeks to start your season against the Raiders, against the Panthers, where if it's Justin Herbert, you're feeling really good about winning those games. If it's Easton Stick, not so much. And I just don't know in the first year of a Jim Harbaugh kind of rebuild, Joe Hortiz rebuild, if they can afford to lose games like that at the beginning of the season, that they, some of their easier games on paper of the year. So I think it just puts them in a predicament of, okay, hey, we want to be super cautious with this, but this is also probably not a team that can afford to drop 2 games at the beginning of the season against the likes of the Raiders and the Panthers. So I think we'll find out more as it keeps going. Right now, I believe he will be back for the regular season. I don't think he's going to be too hampered by it because the weird thing is in the practice that happened, he never left practice. And it was also a practice when he was running the football a lot of scrambles, some designed runs even. After practice later on, he got diagnosed from it, but never actually had to leave the practice. So he dealt with the pain. Okay, then you'd have to think with some rest and recovery that he should be able to tolerate it. It's just, hey, will he re-aggravate it? Will it be something that remains to be a story the rest of the season? I don't think it will be, but if they have to kind of push him back in to get him in for these first couple regular season games, who knows, right? And it's a hard thing to do when you're trying to make a name for the new era and get things off to a good start.
Yeah, and obviously you don't want to rush anything, especially with your franchise player, and especially with an injury like this. You want to obviously take the cautious route with it. But of course,
Yeah.
there is also football to be played here soon. So I know it is a very delicate balance of, okay, you're 98% or you're 95%, kind of going down that list. But also, as you mentioned, Dan, there are just so little details right now outside of what was initially released. So we don't necessarily know. But for you, in the mobility aspect, because everybody knows Justin Herbert has a cannon for an arm. He can sling the rock. But the mobility part to his game, I think, has been somewhat underrated over the course of his career. He can get out into space. He can move, and he can pick up yards with his legs. Now, you said you don't expect it to hamper him too much. And if it is a pain tolerance thing, you also mentioned, and we know this, Justin Herbert is a tough player. We know he can go out there and manage his pain. But how much of his mobility do you expect the Chargers to utilize this year? We know this is year one under Greg Roman for this offense, who notoriously does like to run the football quite a bit. But for Justin Herbert, do you expect him to get out into space more often? And with this injury in mind, could they maybe scale back that plan a bit if that was the plan in the first place?
Yeah, I think you're hitting all the right points there, because I do think that they were planning on using his legs more than the previous regimes were, especially when you're talking about Greg Roman, who obviously coached Lamar Jackson, to an MVP season, and a lot of the good offenses he had in Baltimore were predicated on Lamar Jackson's ability to run. Back in his time with Jim Harbaugh in San Francisco, he had Colin Kaepernick, another guy where the running part of his game was a big part of their offense. And Justin Herbert, I know for a fact they were intrigued by that ability when they were wondering, what is the balance? How much more can we get out of his athleticism? And now it does feel like you have to be more cautious with that. It does feel like if you are doing, a bunch of bootlegs, or you're having design runs and things like that, you could be playing with fire a little bit, depending on how much risk there actually is for re-aggravation. And I think with someone like Justin Herbert, you never want to put him in too much more additional risk than he already was, right? Just standing in the pocket and getting chased down by edge rushers. At the same time, now with this in mind, I do think it has to come into play a little bit. And I think the other part of it too was something like plantar fascia injuries. It's the plant foot, right? It's his right foot, so it's the foot that he's planting with the throw. So we're gonna know if it's gonna impact him very early on, and it's not just the running ability; it's just the ability to be able to plant your foot and drive a throw into an area. So I think if it is bothering him, we're gonna know it pretty early on. And I think for the Chargers, especially with them kind of tinkering with the thought of him, being able to do some design runs and using his athleticism, it has to be factored in, because if all it takes is one, right? You send him out for one design run. If he gets hurt on that play, it all comes crashing down, because as we saw at the end of last season, if your team doesn't have Justin Herbert on it, it's going to get pretty ugly.
Yeah, 100%. And so for you, I know that with the limited information that we all have, it is tough to kind of put a panic meter on this whole thing. But for you now, knowing what we know, and the Chargers fan base in particular as well, are you panicking a little bit over this? Is just the unknown that is maybe a little worrying? Or do you feel like at the end of the day, he's going to be able to come back and kind of work through it? What's kind of the panic meter number for you right now?
Yeah, I guess my panic meter would probably be about a 5. And I think it's a 5 just because there's something, right? It's not nothing. He's not going into the season fully healthy, which is obviously what you're hoping for. And anytime a caliber of that type of player with Justin Herbert has anything going on, it's always going to kind of sit in the back of your mind, just because you know how bad they're going to be without him. Then you factor in how much time he's missing with his new skill position players, right? 2 new brand new receivers that are going to be starting in this offense in DJ Chark and Ladd McConkey, 2 new running backs in Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, 2 new tight ends with Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst. He has had a rapport with Ladd McConkey. That's been coming along pretty well. I'm already surprised that in key moments, right, in situational periods, he is going to him in big downs and third downs and things like that. He has been somewhat of a go-to guy already. Great to see that DJ Chark and him have had a pretty good connection so far, and they're finding the deep ball pretty often at Chargers training camp. That's really nice. And I think the other part of it is with Justin Herbert, someone who has kind of a supercomputer for a brain, you're not as worried about him picking up the offense. So I think with other quarterbacks, it might be more of a concern, because it's like, man, this is another new offense, but you're also talking about a dude who's learned, 4 offenses in the span of 5 seasons. So he has been picking up the offense really well. He already has somewhat of an established connection with some of his new offensive weapons, but these are very critical times in a training camp for a new offense with a total overhaul of skill position players. So I do think it hurts them At the same time, I think Justin Herbert might be an exception to some of that, or wouldn't be at least as worried about him as I might be with other younger quarterbacks who are trying to learn an offense for the first time.
Dan is great. And for more on Dan, check him out over at Locked On Chargers, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up with the second part of the show, we'll talk with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans about DeAndre Hopkins updates. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about on the show. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And for me, I have a bunch, and so many other people do, of self-care non-negotiables. So maybe for some people, you never skip leg day or maybe even therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard for us to sometimes make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. And so therapy has so many benefits, whether it helps you learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It is for everyone. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back, our second segment, Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still rocking out with you here on this Monday. Again, appreciate everybody for being here today and making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers, who takes you all throughout the sports world. Football, basketball, baseball, you name it, Peter has you covered over there. Again, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to be now joined by Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins updates what his timeline is for recovery. Plus, we got some breaking Titans news, so be sure to stay tuned. Let's talk with Tyler now. The Tennessee Titans got a not-so-great injury update on DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to have to miss some time here. Here to talk about that, the implications for Tennessee, and some breaking defensive news for the Titans is Tyler Rowland, the host of Locked On Titans. And Tyler, I know that for DeAndre Hopkins, it was a great move for Tennessee at the time. Obviously, he comes in, he and Will Levis establish some connection together, but the Titans do get some rather unfortunate news with availability for him. Can you kind of go into what happened at the timeline and when you expect Hopkins to be back?
Yeah, so basically earlier this week, or last week, I guess, Wednesday, Thursday, we saw Hopkins at practice with kind of a wrap around his knee, kind of a tape job from below his knee onto the calf, and nobody really thought anything of it at the time. The video came out, something that I noticed when I saw the video of it, but nobody really made a big deal of it. Then a couple of days later, you get the news that he is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, and yes, I mean, that's obviously a blow to the Titans offense. There's no way around it. But I think in this situation, Titans fans should be more optimistic than they generally would be because of the additions the Titans have made. And I think something you just talked about, Kevin, is very important, that DeAndre Hopkins has been on this team for a year. He did develop a connection and chemistry with Will Levis last year. So it may be a new system, new coach. A lot of things are new, but something that's not new is DeAndre Hopkins and Will Levis. So if any of the wide receivers were going to miss a little bit of time, I think Hopkins is obviously one that it's never ideal, but it probably makes the most sense out of everybody. Burks may have been there for a while, but he really needs the time. He's no DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, they brought in Calvin Ridley as a huge signing, which makes this lesser of an impact than it would be for the Titans, say, last year. You bring in Tyler Boyd, same answer there. You got Treylon Burks, a former first-rounder, who now has an opportunity to step up. Once again, the hype train is off the rails for Treylon Burks in training camp. I've been here before, seen this movie before, but maybe the ending's different this time, and this will give Treylon Burks an opportunity to make that ending different, to get more opportunities in training camp and be that physical X receiver and take over for Hopkins. But one other thing that's important here is the timeline. The timeline of Hopkins' injury and how long that's going to be. And when you look at it, it doesn't look like it's going to bleed too much into the regular season. So there are reasons for optimism.
Yeah, and I think as well, you mentioned it there, where maybe last year for Tennessee or 2 years ago for Tennessee with the way the wide receiver room looked, Tyler, I mean, it was Nick Westbrook-Ikine and like all these other guys were like, okay, now you're the number 2 receiver, the number 1 receiver. We are not in that era anymore for the Titans. You mentioned Ridley, you mentioned Boyd, but you also mentioned Treylon Burks, and you mentioned the hype train has already left the station, as it usually does this time of year in training camp with some of these guys. But in your estimation, based off what you've seen, what you've heard, is this maybe the year he can turn it around, or do you feel like he's already gone through so many struggles, it might already be more the beginning of the end here for Treylon Burks?
Well, it's a good a time as ever. I think that you look at the Titans under Mike Vrabel, and they never really developed a quality wide receiver other than A.J. Brown. But A.J. Brown was a 1,000-yard receiver as a rookie, has been even better in Philadelphia. I think it's fair to say that A.J. Brown was probably really, really good no matter where he was going to go. And if anything, the Titans held A.J. Brown back from what he was capable of. I mean, year one sets the single-season record for the Eagles. So I think that one big thing here is that Treylon Burks was under a head coach in Mike Vrabel, who may be a good head coach. He does not quite understand modern NFL football or who to hire to make that happen. And I think that this is as good of a year as any for Burks. He has less pressure on him than ever before because of the signing of Ridley and the addition of Boyd, and just, the pressure's off of him after 2 years of disappointment. Quite honestly, people are just like, I'm not expecting anything from Treylon anymore. That's kind of where I'm at. So he has less expectations, more help around him in terms of better wide receiver talent around him, a better system and better offensive coaching that should help him develop in ways that he wasn't developed in the last 2 years under Mike Vrabel. And then now you get this opportunity. We've heard the cliche, best shape of my life, blah, 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 but everyone is saying it about Treylon Burks. And I'll be honest with you, Kevin, as having a master's in body language, I'm a body language doctor of sorts, you could say. Treylon Burks does look slimmer than he's ever looked before. He does look in better shape. He's running his routes a little bit crispier, I would say, as well. So I think this is as good of a year as any for Treylon Burks to take that step. And if he doesn't take that step this year, then I think people, Titans fans or not, that are still on the Burks hype train, they're going to have to jump overboard a little bit.
Yeah, well, even now flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, Tyler, we got some breaking news really just about an hour or so ago before we sat down here to record this, and that is the signing of Quandre Diggs, another defensive back piece for the Titans. Obviously, you and I hopped on here a couple weeks ago, talked about Jamal Adams. You've been talking about it extensively over on Locked On Titans, but you had mentioned where it's like, okay, this is fine, but maybe they'll bring in somebody else. And they have done that now with Quandre Diggs. They have certainly remade that defense, Tyler. What do you think about this Quandre Diggs signing, and is it exactly what you were hoping that Tennessee would do?
Well, Kevin, I got to say, some might say, and some are saying, that I know ball. I don't know. All jokes aside, look, Jamal Adams, as we talked about, was never a true safety. He's a guy who's going to be a deployable matchup chess piece for the Titans. You go against a heavy run team, you can have Jamal Adams as your early down slot, bringing pressure off the edge. He's a physical guy who likes to tackle. Passing team, you can use Jamal Adams, that dime linebacker, that box linebacker, to match up with tight ends or, blitz up the middle in Denard Wilson's scheme. They were missing that true free safety or that second coverage safety that you needed. Kevin, you cover the Baltimore Ravens. You saw Geno Stone have an excellent year as the deep free safety, the center fielder for the Ravens. Well, the Titans needed that guy. Amani Hooker is their best safety on the team. He can kind of do it all. So you can move him around and do different things with him. Jamal Adams, as I already described, more of a physical safety. I'd call him a linebacker more than anything, honestly. A smaller linebacker. But Quandre Diggs can be that coverage guy. He's got 24 career interceptions. He's played in every game for 4 years running. So even as a guy who's 31, he's not, a guy who's unreliable. So I just think he fits so perfectly with what the Titans needed. And yes, the Jamal Adams signing is good for what he can do, but it was not, as we talked about, it was not the final answer that the Titans needed. And I think heard a ton of reports and saw Will Levis ball out over the last few practices, throwing deep passes, 50-yarder to NWI, 70-yarder to Tyler Boyd, hitting Burks on a deep pass, tons of back shoulder fades with Calvin Ridley. And the Titans were probably like, we've seen enough of our safety group. We do need to go out and get that veteran. And got to mention this, Jamal Adams was at a Titans press conference recently saying that he talks to Quandre Diggs every day and he hopes to work with them. And I do believe ESPN's Teron Davenport reported that this has been in the works for a minute now. So I just think this is a perfect fit for the Titans' skill set to the scheme that they're going to run. And now they have kind of a complete safety trio that can do it all, whatever you need.
Tyler is always awesome. And for more on Tyler, you can check him out on Locked On Titans and right here on Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Rounding out the show coming up, we have Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears in the house talking about DJ Moore getting extended. The Hall of Fame game. Football is back. We'll talk with Lorin next year coming up on Locked On NFL. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop, but it's a playoffs wind down. We get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. In the summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with the booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So for baseball, the MVP race, Gunnar Henderson's still in it, although I know Aaron Judge and Bobby Witt Jr. are certainly 1-2 in that. But if you want those odds, go over to FanDuel. Or for the Ravens, they open up against the Chiefs in week 1. So if you want to get those odds, they open up at 2.5-point underdogs on FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel and head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here with Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still here on this Monday edition of the show. Again, be sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube. Follow along and listen in audio form as well. Really appreciate both our audio and video form communities. 5 days a week of NFL content here on Locked On NFL. Let's talk with Lorin Cox, though. DJ Moore gets extended. The Bears on Hard Knocks, plus football is officially being played. We got the Hall of Fame game result. We'll talk with Lorin about all that now. Well, DJ Moore got his money from the Chicago Bears, a key weapon for Caleb Williams extended. Here to talk about that with me and more Bears is Lorin Cox, the host of Locked On Bears. And Lorin, the Bears have stayed busy this offseason for sure. And of course, that does come with the number 1 overall pick, trying to build that roster out around it. But a move they made last year was obviously moving off of the number 1 overall pick. And in that deal, they got DJ Moore from the Carolina Panthers, had a great year for them, and of course gets rewarded with a big money extension. So for you, Lorin, I want to start just, if you could get into the specifics of the deal and whether you thought this was a good deal for Chicago, a good deal for Moore, or a good deal for both sides.
Yeah, it's interesting timing because he still has 2 years left on his contract, right? This year and the following year at only about a $16 million cap hit each season. So it felt like, well, the Bears were going to get a steal for the end of DJ Moore's contract here and maybe pay him after that and, move that on to the future and enjoy the savings while they could. DJ Moore hadn't formally requested any kind of contract extension. There was no holdout. There was no drama. He hadn't really talked about it at all, but the Bears still went out of their way to say, you know what, let's reward this player. And I think in the process, they built some more financial flexibility in for themselves by saying, hey, listen, DJ, we'll give you a pay raise now, but we'll build in at the end of this contract that we'll have some flexibility as you enter free agency on the back end, so we're not locked into something major. So they added 4 years to the contract, so he's going to be under contract for 6 more years. But what they did is they guaranteed this year and next year, and then added a couple guaranteed years on top of that, and then a couple of unguaranteed years at the end. So the 2 unguaranteed years he has right now, they basically moved those to the end and put 4 years in smack dab in the middle right now when he's still 27 years old, entering the prime of his career, playing some of the best football of his career. And if there gets to be any drop-off as he gets across the age 30 and into the later years of his career, well, all of a sudden you're not locked into any major money for him, and they locked him in at a per year average lower than what a lot of the other top wide receivers were getting this offseason. So they saved themselves some money in the long run by paying him now a little bit earlier than they maybe needed to.
Yeah, and so you lock in a 4-year, $110 million extension. You don't really see this too often, Lorin, the locked in through the 2029 season, as you alluded to. So long time for DJ Moore coming in the Chicago Bears uniform. But last year for you, what did you see out of him? Obviously, he's a stud, and he has been that way. But from what you saw last year to now, what you expect this year, what are your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to move them any higher than they were. I mean, last season in a not great Bears offense, it had its ups and downs, but the Justin Fields experience was a lot of a roller coaster there, and he was hurt a little bit. Like DJ Moore still had 1,200 yards and looked every bit the bona fide number 1 wide receiver this offense was looking for. I mean, he was a guy who could go off for a 150-yard game a couple times a year when there wasn't a lot else there threatening opposing defenses. I mean, Cole Kmet at tight end, yeah, but like as far as the wide receiver core went, I mean, the plan initially was like Chase Claypool was supposed to be a big part of this receiver core, and we kind of saw how that played out. Darnell Mooney had a really down year, and it was tough all around for everyone but DJ Moore. And I think his ability to exceed in those circumstances leaves you to be really confident in giving him this contract extension and feeling like, wow, you give him Caleb Williams and you add, Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze to this offense. So other weapons are going to get the attention of coverage that some of these guys are going to get a lot easier matchups here, and teams are going to have to take turns on who they're going to cover or double cover on certain plays. So he might not have the exact same yardage because there's more passes to go around to more mouths to feed, but like the impact on this team is going to remain incredibly high for this year and the foreseeable future. And the key there is locking him up for the duration of Caleb Williams' rookie contract while you can afford big, expensive wide receivers while your quarterback is cheap.
Yeah, and that's the thing. This is how you build around a rookie quarterback. I know, Lorin, we have had conversations about how Chicago didn't necessarily do the best job of that for Justin Fields, but it seems like they're correcting that now with Caleb Williams. Now, speaking of Caleb Williams, he did not play in the Hall of Fame game, but there was football back, and I think for everybody it felt so good. The Bears and the Texans match up. The Bears will have to win. They're 1-0 in the preseason. But for you, Lorin, who impressed you? Because we didn't see starters for Chicago, but was there anybody that caught your eye that could maybe be a dark horse candidate to make the roster, or someone who you thought needed to have a big game that did?
Yeah, a few key players on both sides of the ball, far from household names, though. Their fifth-round pick, Austin Booker out of Kansas, they need him to – he's a defensive end pass rusher. They need to step up and be not a starter as a rookie fifth-round pick, but someone who can play key rotational snaps off the bench and give you some of those flash plays, get to the quarterback every once in a while, and build up a couple sacks there as he adds some strength and develops out a little bit more of his technique into his career. He's someone who flashed and didn't have the big quarterback hit per se, but made a couple of nice pass rush moves and was just shy of helping out on a strip sack that happened in the game. It happened because he got the pressure that moved the quarterback into the hands of his teammates. So he showed the kind of pass rush flashes that we wanted to see. And then their third string quarterback, Brett Ripien, had a nice connection with one of their a former fifth round pick wide receiver for a couple teams ago, Colin Johnson. He's about 6'5", made a couple of really nice high point back shoulder fades down the sideline. They had thrown exactly one pass to each other at training camp, come into the game and connected 3 times for a touchdown and really made made a name for himself. And I think with, Hard Knocks coming around the corner, he definitely sounds like one of those guys that is going to be that end of the roster guy that you fall in love with and they tell you his whole backstory and you follow him all the way up until the end of training camp and you have the meeting with the coach. Does he make the team or does he not make the team? Like Colin Johnson emerged as that guy in the Hall of Fame game.
That is a perfect transition because Chicago they're going to be the stars of Hard Knocks here. First episode coming out this week. And for you, Lorin, in terms of the storylines that Hard Knocks has to offer, what are you expecting? Because we had the conversation when it was announced that Chicago was going to be in this. But for you, with preseason now in full swing, training camp now in full swing, what are you looking for out of Hard Knocks in this first episode?
Yeah, obviously we're going to get plenty of Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, and we want to see all that stuff, right? That's not to say that's going to be boring or uninteresting. It's just like that's the obvious what we're all expecting and hoping to see from Hard Knocks. But I hope they really play up some of the different dynamics that we've seen at training camp where this Bears defense, they've all been together for a few seasons now. They're a veteran group that played really well last season. The offense, new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, new receivers, new pieces, young guys all trying to get to know each other. So you've got this defense that is like confident and loud and trash talking and getting in the offense's face and really making their presence felt. And the offense trying to kind of chug along and find their way. And we saw over the course of training camp, I think one of the stars at Hard Knocks that will emerge is defensive end DeMarcus Walker the former Tennessee Titan, has been really kind of poking and prodding and chirping at the offensive line all training camp long. And finally, last week, the offense pushed back and got into a big skirmish, and Caleb Williams ran in there and was getting in the middle of everything. And like the two sides kind of had to be separated for the first time and he even said afterwards, like, I've been trying to push him like their big brother. You got to bully your little brother a little bit until he finally learns to defend himself and fight back a little bit. He ended that quote by saying, "See, bullying works," and then laughed about it. So I think we're going to see that personality shine through on Hard Knocks, and to kind of see the little brother, big brother offensive defensive dynamic, I think should be fun because the Bears defense definitely talks.
Lorin is incredible at the Bears coverage. And for more on Lorin, check him out over at Locked On Bears, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I got for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in today. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with their Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.